Welcome to Last Chance Theater. I'm Justin.
And I'm Laura. This episode we're going to be talking about Heathers.
It's my first time ever seeing this movie, and that's kind of our thing here, is that there's a lot of movies that I probably should have seen, and I haven't seen.
It's a problem.
And Laura is kind of introducing me to these movies, and we're going to talk about them one at a time here on this show.
So Heathers it's a classic film, but it's one that makes a lot of people very uncomfortable, so you aren't alone in not having seen it, I think.
It's from before my time, really. I was alive. Like, I was still, 3 when it came out, and so I wouldn't have seen it in the moment. And I've heard it discussed as a comparison to mostly Mean Girls, which I get it, but I don't get it at the same time, because they're not the same movie at all.
Mean Girls takes a lot from Heathers.
I can see that.
Without Heathers, Mean Girls never would have been a thing.
The thing I did was I was watching it and I put a Facebook status up and said that this is not the movie I thought it was going to be. Like, I was expecting a completely different movie.
So I'm curious, what were you expecting?
Well, because of the Mean Girls comparison, I was expecting something, not really a derivative, but what things were derived from. Because I've seen a lot of movies where there's, a kind of school queen and someone's trying to unseat her. And so I was thinking we were going that route. And we get to a certain point where it could have gone that route, and it was like, oh, she meets the boy, and it could go this route. But then all of a sudden it takes a hard left, and you're like, whoa, this is not what I signed up for, but I like it. And that's kind of how it went down. And, this is all coming on the tail end of Stranger Things, which I watched last week. And so seeing little Winona Ryder was kind of weird for me. It was like, she's weirdly young.
This isn't little Winona Ryder. If you've seen her in other stuff like Beetlejuice and things like that came before.
This made me want to watch Beetlejuice really bad. I'll say that right now. But you seem to have a lot of thoughts about Winona Ryder's character. I mean, do you have any thoughts about her at the beginning that you...
Oh, well, I mean, it's very interesting. I don't know if you pulled out the reference that her name is Veronica and her former best friend is named Betty.
I actually have a note on that.
And they're a blonde and a brunette. And that's obviously on purpose.
I hope
but
it was.
But to me, it's interesting. It's interesting to me that the movie jumps in with Veronica having already been established as part of the popular group. Usually in a lot of teen movies, you'll have, even in Mean Girls, you'll have the build-up to the main character becoming part of that group and then having the ensuing drama and fallout from that. But in Heathers, she's definitely is already part of that at the beginning of the movie. She's already doing what the Heathers ask her to do. She already sits with them at lunch. She's already abandoned her friends. And it's kind of just status quo up until she meets JD.
And I kind of like that they did start off with her sort of being in the group, but not really buying into what they are doing exactly.
Yeah, which is another interesting thing. She's completely aware of how terrible these girls are. And she has resigned herself to being okay with it because it keeps her above everybody else at the school. I don't know if it's a survival mechanism necessarily, but it's something where you can see it's calculated, and she's playing into it.
I'm going to be honest, and I hope they never listen to this, but I did the same thing she did with girls at my school in high school. I didn't really hang out with very many people, and there were some girls that were a little bit above everybody else in our grade, and I just kind of sat by them and hung around with them because if you were over there, they weren't going to talk about you. They were talking about everybody else, and so I just kind of listened to their gossip and, ate over there by them. And, I mean, I can see why she would totally do that because it keeps you safe because you're not a target when you're over there assisting,
But I mean, interestingly enough, as the movie goes, being popular is what makes you a target as it goes on. Later in the movie, she's the target of a lot of rumors when the jocks spread lies about the sword fighting in her mouth stuff. And so it's not even safe necessarily to be popular. As a woman, it's not really safe in this movie, I would think, especially.
I mean, I think that's a common thing. I think that there's it's like a sort of easy A dichotomy where there's a girl who she's popular because people think she does things she doesn't do. and then guys will buy into that and kind of fuel the rumors to make themselves look better. And so, you know, if she wasn't popular, it wouldn't really be a target, like you say, because there wouldn't be any, you know, like value to saying you did this with this girl.
There's the fact that, you know, Heather Duke spreads things about Heather McNamara about 2/3 of the way through the movie to pull her down so that she can kind of be in charge of the school.
Yeah, it's like a power vacuum thing going on. And I really want to talk about Heather Duke because I think it's amazing we've gone, you know, this many minutes into this thing and no one said Shannon Doherty yet, because that was the craziest thing to me. It took me about 5 minutes to see it was her because it just, in my head, the red hair threw me off completely. And,
she doesn't have red hair.
It's pretty red.
It's brown.
I don't know, like, I was watching with somebody else and they were like, oh, she's got red hair in this. And I kind of saw it that way too. Maybe our TV's color is off.
No,
I don't know.
You guys are confused.
We're confused.
You're very confused. It's definitely brown hair.
It's definitely not the color hair I'm used to her seeing her with. Like, you know, it was always like a darker black kind of thing she had going on. And
right.
And seeing her in a role like this was kind of like, it was kind of weird. It was weird and neat for me. Because there's three actors that are super familiar faces: Christian Slater, Ryder, and Doherty. And Christian Slater made me so upset. His eyebrows made me upset. His earring made me upset. His like fake Jack Nicholson impression made me upset.
Well, I mean, you know, that's who he based his character on, right? Like, he
I saw
specifically was going after a Jack Nicholson impression.
I saw that later, but it was just like, when I saw it in the moment, I was like, oh, he's doing like a Jack Nicholson impression. Like, this is weird for me. His
character makes me like super uncomfortable. He reminds me a lot of my first high school boyfriend. So this movie, like, I love it, but it also really, really creeps me out.
Oh, he made you murder people?
Well, not with the killing people, obviously, but that boyfriend did, like, when I broke up with him, he did threaten to kill himself. And he just was also weirdly intense and had just some weird family issues that kind of fueled a lot of things about him.
I mean, I have
that character just really makes me uncomfortable.
I think that it's also like, I had a thought during this movie, like halfway through. I was like, this movie is better if you pretend in your mind that JD is the devil. Like, he's like, for like a good portion of the movie, it feels like, because he's like tempting her into doing all these things. And then after that, like, I was kind of like, oh, he won't be a part of her imagination or something like Tyler Durden. Is that where this is going? But it wasn't.
Well, obviously no, because other people have talked to him earlier in the movie.
Yeah, but it could have been one of those things where they're speaking to her and she's just acting out because she wants to be.
You mean people that are going, oh, his name is Jason.
I don't know. It was just, it felt like he was almost like a made up character, because in my head, I tried to rationalize how the movie wasn't actually taking place. Like, it was like an American Psycho sort of thing where she's imagining all this.
That's weird. Why would you do that?
Well, the reason you said earlier that this is a movie that is uncomfortable for a lot of people, and I wasn't uncomfortable with it. I thought it was hilarious, but at the same time, a movie that's like this feels like it's surreal. Like, it's a surrealism that you don't usually get in a high school movie with high school kids. Like, it wouldn't fly today. Like, the stuff they were doing just would not fly. What I really like about these older 80s movies is that, even though I'm not like really down with 80s stuff that much, they use actual teenagers to play teenage roles. And that's so rare now that when it's done, people act like it's wrong or something. Like, when a real teenager plays a teenage role.
They weren't all teenagers. Some of them were in their 20s.
Really? Okay. Well, Ryder was young. She was like 18 in this, 17.
She wasn't super young. She was obviously younger in like Beetlejuice and stuff like that.
She's like 16 in that.
But some of the Heathers were in their 20s.
Oh, really? Slater is 20. I know that.
What were your thoughts on the Heathers then? I'm curious.
Well, so for a good 20 minutes of the movie, I somehow imagined there were 4 of them. I don't know how this happened, but there was a 4th Heather that didn't exist in my head.
It's because Veronica is technically a Heather. She does the color coordinated outfits just like they do. She wears blue, which I think that there's a lot of significance to the colors that they wear, obviously. But she is the fourth Heather.
The actual Heather, just to keep on topic with that, I feel like they really kind of gave McNamara a short end of the stick because he seemed like he was like featured less, I guess, because early in the movie Heather Chandler kind of takes all the gusto out of the film. And she gets all the best lines. She gets the chainsaw line.
Well, that's because she's head bitch. Like she started it. Like
the funny thing is that the chainsaw line I was reading was actually Doherty's line, and she was uncomfortable with the cursing, which is just shocked me about her.
Yeah, she grew up in a very conservative family, so she struggled with some of the profanity, which is why usually when she has any profane lines, she's kind of giggling or smirking.
I didn't notice that. But like she got that line early on, and that was the line where I was like, whoa. And then she was like the leader, obviously. And then what I liked about her was that this movie had a kind of like honest vulgarity that you don't usually see in like high school teen movies. Like a lot of the times with,
at least attributed to girls.
Yeah. Like with boys, there was like a time in the 80s for some reason where like young boys, like 13-year-old boys in movies were just like saying like curse words constantly, and they were like making weird gay slurs at each other. But when you look at women in the same roles in the same type of movie, they weren't doing that. And so to see it from a movie like this, even though they're a little older, it was still pretty neat to see women like acting like real women sometimes act. And then Heather McNamara, I don't have any thoughts on her. I don't know why, I just don't. And Heather Duke, there's like a weird transformation there. Like I said, the power vacuum thing happens, and she kind of lets JD like push her into trying to take over things. And she was the one I expected to be the smaller role. Like I expected the two blonde Heathers to be the bigger ones. And I was kind of like, oh, Doherty's just here, but she's a small role in this. When in all honesty, she kind of takes over and becomes a bigger part of the main cast. And then
with Heather Duke, I think that you can see it early on that she's a little bit like Veronica. She's smart. Like you can see she's always reading in the early scenes when they show her. And I think, like Veronica, she's very smart. She understands that she needs to be popular, to be safe, to have status. But her approach is a lot more Machiavellian, I think, in that she's willing to push people out of her way, like she does with Heather McNamara. And she wasn't able to do that with Heather Chandler.
Yeah, I think it was one of those like, not really Starscream, that's a bad example, but one of those things where there's, you're kind of like by the sidelines waiting for the other person to like crumble, and you can't like take them on your own, and you can't get anyone to gang up and help you. But once they're gone, like once they're removed from the picture, you have a clear shot at like taking the throne. And I think she kind of knew that. And that's what you're like talking about, that when she realized there was like no one up there. I think she probably also kind of worried Veronica would take it. Like I think that she thought,
I totally think that.
Yeah, in the immediate aftermath, I think she was like, oh, she'll take over this position from
Veronica was the only one who ever stood up to Heather Chandler. She was the only one that ever was on her level, but Veronica just never had the interest in being the popular bitch.
I think that Heather Chandler also was supposedly rich, and it confused me because they go to her bedroom at one point, she has a full bed. I was like, a full bed? Really? Like full? Like that's the like not richest thing ever. Like if you were rich, you'd have a big bed, And I was obsessed.
She has a huge room though. She's got a couch and she's got a table and she's got a lot of stuff. Just because she has a full bed doesn't mean she's not rich.
I fixated on that full bed for a while, and there was other things I fixated on that, oddly enough, I Googled them and I couldn't find shit about it. I like searched all over the place. Like I was waiting in the movie for like a reference to be made. I don't know why JD and his dad live in a gym. Like his dad has like 6 weight bars in the background when you can only use one at a time. They don't live in
a gym, but he just has a lot of weight equipment.
And okay, so explain their VCR and their record player being a rock. What the fuck was that? Like that was
a facade. It was something that you'd put over your electronics.
Oh, well, I wrote a note for JD's dad, and I was like, I bet JD's dad's character note says sleeps on a waterbed, because that was the first impression I got. I was like, this man has a waterbed in his room. Like he went out and got a waterbed when they first got popular, and he kept it until the 90s when they started to burst and people knew it was a stupid idea.
Well, his dad is completely juvenile. He is someone who never grew out of being a teenager. He's all about blowing shit up and working out and talking to his son like his son is the dad.
That was the weirdest thing. Like, they were like doing this role reversal, and I was like, what are you guys doing right now? Like, what's happening with this?
That's one of the things that still like kind of baffles me about this movie. Like, I understand that it's supposed to like show that they're a really fucked up relationship, but it's just so bizarre because they keep it up throughout the whole movie.
You could probably do like a weird analysis on JD's character alone, and I think that a lot of it is just like they were trying to show that whole the parent that acts like a friend thing, where he's not disciplining him or making him follow any sort of rules.
I would take that like one step further though and say that not only is his dad not disciplining him, but he's giving him too much leeway and allowing JD to make the rules.
And I would also say that it's probably one of those things where JD is probably a smart enough kid and a careful enough kid that the things he does wrong aren't the kind of things that would trigger his dad looking into what he's doing. And so he manages himself well enough, but he's also not supervised. So he is getting into trouble. And, he sneakily, like the gun thing at the beginning of school, like that was the weirdest thing because I was watching with someone else. And when that happened, we're like, oh, it's a dream sequence. But they're like, oh, no, it's not a dream sequence. This is like really happened. Like he pulls this gun out and fires blanks at somebody. That was like one of the things where I was like, today there would be people up in arms about it because,
well, right. That is one thing too about this movie is that it came out before school shootings were kind of everyday news. Like, yeah, it came out, I wouldn't say in a sweet spot, but it came out in a time where that wasn't a complete concern. And so it was really weird that you have this happening in the movie.
It's like that sweet spot between us being scared of the Russians and us being scared of school shootings and terrorism is where this movie kind of fell into. The gun at the beginning was the school shooting thing where I was like, oh man, that wouldn't fly today. And then at the end of the movie, there's basically a suicide bomb vest. And I was like, oh, that definitely wouldn't fly today. Like, not in a comedy, like that would get you in huge trouble. Or it would at least get you talked about. Like they won't pull your movie out of theaters for that, but people would definitely react badly.
The thing is you're going to have trouble finding funding for your movie today if you have that content.
True. People react to things now. Like they react to things fast because of Twitter. People can react and say that they don't want this thing or that thing. And it makes studios wary of funding a thing that might not make money.
Well, yeah, it's Hollywood they don't take risks. When you have material that is borderline offensive, you're not going to make a mainstream movie about it.
It didn't make me uncomfortable because I don't really get uncomfortable about things like that. But it made me kind of go, oh man, this would just never fly today. And then there's the funeral scene, the second funeral scene, because the first one is kind of just a funeral. But the second funeral scene really baffled me, and this is why the movie took me almost 3 hours to watch, because there's a song playing on organ in the background. The song sounds so familiar, and I was humming it and like trying to figure out what words I know go to it, and I played it like at least 20 times. And then I finally stopped doing that and went on YouTube and looked the song up and listened to it over and over, and I could not figure out what it was. Like the YouTube comments don't say anything about it. The name of the song on the album is just like Second Funeral Song, and I know I've heard it somewhere. Like either someone got that song later on and sampled it or something.
That means nothing to me. So
I mean, like I could let you hear it, but it's like it is something where I'm like, oh, this is a song I know. Like, and I even played it for other people and they're like, yeah, it sounds really familiar, but it's playing on an organ, so you can't like sound hound it. And then there's no words, and it really bothers me. And I had to just let it go because I was like, maybe Laura knows what this is because I have to let this go because if I don't, I'll be up all night like searching for this stupid song.
No, I mean, if it was meant to be a reference to something, that would have been in the credits.
I don't think it was a reference. I honestly think that the song was sampled by someone else later. I don't know. It really bothered me though. Like usually I can figure them out within like 10 minutes.
That's a really weird thing to be bothered about. Like of all the things in this movie to like just focus on that is very strange.
I mean, I have a good reason why. Like we have the internet and Google. So typically when you can't figure out who an actor is or what a song is or whatever, you can just go on Google and look them up.
But that's still such a weird thing to just like keep looking up like when you're not finding anything.
But you have to understand that like 18 years almost, I haven't had to look up anything that I couldn't just find an answer to. So to find something like that, I was like, oh no, it's happening.
That's strange.
Well, you know I'm strange, so I don't know why you're acting like this is some kind of surprise to you. The Betty and Veronica reference you made earlier, we didn't really talk about Betty because Betty is not really super important, but I was obsessed with Betty because I was like, oh, Betty's kind of cute. Like, what's her deal? And then I looked up who the actress was, and it's Charlie Sheen's sister. I didn't know he even had a sister.
Yeah, it's Renee Estevez.
Yeah, I mean, people were confused by that because the Estevez thing and him and Emilio and Sheen, the dad, and like, people don't realize that like they're the same family. Like, I've had people be like, "Oh, they're the same family." I'm like, "Yeah, they're."
I thought most people knew that. Most people I know that.
I think that it's common knowledge in some circles, but I think that if you're not paying attention to the Charlie Sheen drama and Martin Sheen and stuff like that, it can kind of pass you by. Like,
to me, that's not really a big deal. Like, she's not someone that's had a huge career, so
yeah, she definitely hasn't. I feel like she has a really small part.
Betty as a
movie,
character truly means nothing other than what Veronica used to be in some respects. And what she could have been had she not been a Heather.
Betty is the Barb of the movie.
After she kind of reconnects with Veronica the one time to play croquet, she disappears from the movie because everything else is Martha Dunstock. And so she gets used frequently throughout the movie, but Betty just kind of disappears.
The croquet thing, I was like, this girl's obsessed with croquet.
Well, croquet is a very competitive game because a lot of times you end up having to knock people out of the way, which is a larger metaphor for the movie.
Oh, wow. See, like, I'm shocked that, I guess you've either played croquet or know something about it.
Well, it's used in, like, Alice in Wonderland and things like that. But it's just, it's an old game, and it's one where you get to knock other people out of the way so that you can score, because you get points for knocking people out of the way. It's not always the fastest way to win, which is why Veronica makes a point about how that's not how she wants to win. But it is one way to win.
That makes more sense now because there's the whole reference to her saying, like, the foreshadowing of her being like, I don't want to win that way. But then she totally starts doing that. Like, she starts knocking competition out of the way and not necessarily taking their place, because we haven't really discussed the two boys that she got rid of. Those guys are pretty horrible. Like, I remember they're going to go cow tipping, which is terrible. Like, that's like animal abuse. But anyway, they go to the field to go cow tipping. And I think that's the same scene where the one boy is trying to make out with this girl on the ground.
He straight up date rapes her. Like,
that's what I thought. Because
you can see it later on when Veronica leaves her to go hang out with JD.
Yeah.
Heather is basically being date raped, and Veronica does absolutely zero things about it. And this is a critique that I have for Veronica and JD, is that they act like they're doing the school a service by getting rid of all these bullies and, trying to make it a better place. But every time they're actually in the face of that bullying, they do nothing about it. They just go along with it.
And yeah, like, that's the thing, is that she kind of just goes up that fence and she leaves with JD and the girls in the background flailing around. And I actually just thought that they were, I don't know. I at first I thought, okay, this is just like a weird looking scene because it's so far away. But then a friend of mine's walking through the room and he's like, is that girl getting raped? And then in my head it clicked. I was like, oh yeah, that's totally what's happening here. Like, that's not meant to be a weird looking thing. Like, that's what's going on. And
right.
She doesn't do anything about it, and JD doesn't do anything about it. And they totally could have said something or done something. They take care of the two boys that are involved after the fact, but in the moment, they don't care to help the other girl. And there's so much going on where they could have done something earlier. And I think it's more JD. JD kind of preaches this message of, we're trying to stop these bad people, but he doesn't do anything.
He thinks he's the moral authority, but he's obviously very flawed in that he thinks it's okay to kill people.
It's not just that. It's also that he lies to Veronica openly to get her to go along with things. And in a way, you're like, well, he's already killed one person. So when he gives Veronica a gun and says it's full of blanks, first of all, like, let's just get this straight. Blanks are fatal.
I mean, okay, so with Veronica, do you find her sympathetic? Do you find her to be a good person?
I think she learns to be a good person.
Throughout the movie, I don't find her to be a good person. Because a lot of what we've just talked about, where she does nothing. She thinks that she is being a good person, but she's not. She doesn't follow through on any of the things that she says that she wants. And she has to know that the things that JD is planning are not okay. Starting with, when Heather Chandler is killed. That was technically an accident from Veronica's perspective. But she continues to allow him to play violent pranks. And with the thing with the bullets that he tells her are just going to make you bleed. Like, the name of the bullets in German means I'm lying. So she had bothered to do, like, any research or even think about it more than just be on the moment. She would know, he's fucking with me. These are real bullets. He doesn't lie very well about it. Like, he's like, you let him get away, and then goes and chases him, and she's still acting like it doesn't matter.
I was going to ask you, like, do you think that it was that he lied to her and she believed it? Or do you think it was that he lied to her and she was just like, I'm going to use that as my excuse to do this bad thing because I want to do it. But if he lied to me, quote unquote, I have like a plausible deniability.
I think she subconsciously knew that he was lying to her, and she was okay with it. She chose to believe it. She didn't really care what actually happened.
Yeah, they've never shown her to be stupid before that.
Right, she's actually very smart, and she talks about her high IQ.
Yeah.
So for her to fall kind of prey to these really stupid lines from JD is either an insult to her character being, in love with him, or it's that she truly does kind of want to go along with it.
And the love thing was kind of like he was trying to find someone at the school who was in a position that he could latch onto and use, because the moment that she kind of dumped him off, he goes right to Heather Duke and is like, oh, I'm going to be your friend now, and we're going to do this stuff, and we're going to do this petition.
To an extent, but I think part of the reason he goes to Heather Duke is because he wants to hurt Veronica. I think that's him lashing out more than needing a person, because I truly don't think he needs anybody. I think he's obviously just fine on his own from his perspective, which says a lot. There's a lot of things wrong with him, obviously.
I mean, I feel like he might have needed an accomplice.
No, he didn't. He never needed an accomplice. I think he cared about Veronica, but in a very destructive way. He thought that he could control her, and when she didn't respond to being controlled very well, and she dumped him, he kind of lost it.
I think that it was also partially that he's not a part of that world. Like, he comes to the school, mid-year or whatever, and he can't really, he's convincing to certain types of people, but when he comes up to, a jock or something, he can't make them do what he wants them to do. So he got somebody to help him who could do those things, Heather Duke or Veronica. But I mean, yeah, I guess the lashing out of Veronica makes sense too.
Well, I mean, I don't think that he came to the school planning to kill anybody. I think for him that was a happy accident that he decided to repeat.
Okay, I could see that. Like, the first death was honestly on Veronica's part not really a mistake, because she didn't do anything. She just said, she left him downstairs, and he, of course, pours the juice in there and not juice, pours the, I think it was drain cleaner in there. And brings it.
They were making out and she grabbed the wrong one by mistake.
Oh,
and he goes to tell her about it, and then he just says, oh no, I'll come with you. But instead of telling her that she grabbed the wrong one. Like,
it was still a mistake on her part, because she didn't mean to grab the wrong container, and he let her do it.
Right. No, it was obviously an accident for Veronica, and it was to an extent an accident for JD, but it was one that he was okay with once he realized what was happening.
It was like an accident of omission, where he was like, well, she did this on mistake and I noticed it, but I'm going to let it play out and see what happens. And even then, like, once the omission ended, once they got to the room, because he actively pushes Heather Chandler to drink it, and when she doesn't drink it, he kind of goads her into it. It's not like he couldn't have stopped it at that point, or said something, or stopped her before she like actually put it to her face, or just not, let her do it.
No, but he, without, them sleeping together, he never would have been in the position to have that happen.
Yeah.
So I don't think he was ever setting out to kill anybody initially. But once he realized that he had fun with it and that he enjoyed it, I think that's when he wanted more.
He definitely embodies like a sociopath, it looks like.
Right, and it's something that you see with his dad as well, with his dad taking so much joy out of blowing buildings up. And they make reference to JD's mother being in one of those buildings because she didn't want to live with JD's father anymore. And his dad was okay with blowing his wife up. Yeah,
that was weird for me. Like, I felt like they were trying to explain why JD was so fucked up. And that was like their explanation was that he had kind of lost somebody. And I
don't think they ever made it to just specifically that. But I mean, obviously, I think that is definitely a part of it. Like his mother choosing to die over spending time with him or raising him or getting him away from his father. She kind of chose to abandon them and left him with a terrible, terrible person as a parent.
The dad came off to me as just kind of like the creepy old man who just kind of goes after like younger girls and works out a lot and, drives a nice car, has a great job. And it felt like without them really showing any of that stuff to me, that they were trying to say that that's what he spends his time paying attention to. And, as long as JD is fed and at home occasionally, he's okay with whatever JD's doing. because JD's not interrupting his fun or whatever.
Right. As long as he gets to blow stuff up and his son seems to be okay, he's fine.
I had another thing about the clothes in this movie, which we touched on earlier, and the first thing I thought about that was during one of the many croquet games that happens in this film, I thought that the Heathers and Veronica were dressed like real estate agents almost, like they were like all these like kind of blazers and.
That's the late 80s, early 90s style. So
the blossom hats.
Like, the most specific thing to me is the colors. You've got Heather Chandler in red, the power color. You've got Heather McNamara in yellow, which is the really passive color. And you've got Heather Duke in green, which is very envious. And then you've got Veronica in kind of the neutral blue, and she tones it down with a lot of black and grays. Especially as the movie goes on, she's in a lot more black and gray than she is blue. But she still embraces the Heather's color coding with her blue tights and blue skirts and stuff.
The blue tights were there a lot. There's also a coat she wears like twice, and it's like a coat made out of a bunch of other coats. It's like one sleeve looks like this and like the middle looks like that. And I was like obsessed with that coat. I'm really like, I fixate on people's clothes in movies sometimes because they get so outlandish in some instances. And JD actually, it's funny because JD's clothes to me didn't look very 80s. They looked more grunge and 90s style stuff. And I guess it's close to the 90s at that point, but
to me, his clothes scream I'm a psychopath because he's got the long duster and he just wears all black. And it's like, if I knew that kid in high school, I'd be like, that kid's lost it. Like, I don't want to hang out with him.
It's funny because, you know, we're looking back at something from a time after Columbine, after all these things.
Right.
But when I was in high school, there was a kid, he like would mumble to himself and stuff, and he wore a trench coat to school every day. And
yeah, there were kids like that at my high school too, and they were weird.
Yeah, people were upset by it, and you know the school couldn't really necessarily do anything. Like, what are you going to say? Like, oh, you can wear a coat like that here? But at the same time, like, it was creepy.
We had a school policy against trench coats at some point.
Yeah, I think that because we weren't in a district, we were a Catholic school, we didn't have that same policy. But I mean, I could see how a public school would just squash that out because public schools are all about like, don't do these things that are going to threaten anybody or make anybody feel threatened.
Well, so there's one kid that I'm thinking of. He would brought it in his jacket or in his backpack, so he would wear it like to and from school and like on the bus and stuff. But then he would obviously change out of it at school.
But you are in the North, you're in Seattle, and I'm down here in Texas. So a trench coat up there makes a little more sense. Down here, it was, you know, we have 2 months, summer and spring. And so, like, if you're wearing a coat, like, it's the mornings and stuff. He wore this trench coat all day.
But I mean, here, it's very unusual to see a man in a full-length trench coat. That's very bizarre, especially like a dark leather one. Like, that's not normal for here, even though we have cooler weather.
Your guy was fancy. Our guy had like one of those like kind of khaki material.
Oh no, our guy just he shopped at like Hot Topic.
That's a thing that we both latch on to because we grew up in a time like that. And so when you look back at JD, he does look like that, but also, his clothes are too big for him, which I don't know if that's a style choice or if that's a thing.
That was a style in the early 90s for sure, and late 90s.
Because I felt like they were trying to make a point about his dad not really paying attention to him. Like, oh, I'll just buy these bigger clothes and they'll just fit him because they're bigger.
I don't think that's anything to do with his dad. Because, I mean, especially JD is a teenager at that point, so his dad's not buying him clothes. His dad's not caring what he's wearing.
Teenage boys do not like buying their own clothes.
But I mean, if you have a specific style, then you don't want like basic clothes, like you want to be the rebel, you're gonna buy your own things. Oh, so speaking of interesting fashion choices, I really want to know what you think about Veronica's monocle.
In my head I was like, that's so fucking crazy that I can't even like write this down. Like I can't fathom it.
It's such a weird choice. I've never seen a monocle used for like a teenage girl in a movie ever.
In the 80s, you had weird shit happen like that. Like there's I want to say it's Pretty in Pink or 16 Candles. There's a dude in a full-on Geordie LaForge visor. Like this is like, he looks like fucking Cyclops from the X-Men. And this is shown on screen as if it's a regular thing. And my brother, who grew up in the 80s, he was 18 when I was born, was like, yeah, people used to do shit like that. And I'm like, that baffles me. I guess we have the same thing, you know, now. Like, there's kids that wear wolf tails where I live, and that's a popular thing. So I guess we can't speak too much about
thing.
At
my school, those kids hung out with the kids in the trench coats and no one talked to them.
Oh, the news did a story on them here. They called themselves the Wolf Pack, and they were like sort of emo kids who were trying to be anti-suicide or something. And I don't know.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, like I've seen a few of them at Walmart and stuff. You'll be in line. There'll be like a girl in a wolf tail. And at first I thought they were furries, and I was like, oh man, furries are out here in public now just showing off. And so like I saw that and didn't know what to think of it. Then I saw the news report about it, and it was like a whole big deal. But it just looks weirder to me for someone to have a visor on, because I'm not growing up in a time where that sort of shit could happen.
And just the monocle is just, it's such an interesting choice, because like, I don't know, I associate monocles with like Scrooge McDuck, like, and so it makes her seem so much older, which is maybe what she's going for. She desperately does not want to be a teenager, like.
But I mean, when you're a teenager, that's what you don't want to be. Like, I didn't want to be a teenager.
Right. So it's very interesting.
It's funny you say that, because Winona Ryder is so young looking. Like there's of course the scenes where she's with the Heathers, she has on more makeup and it's harder to tell. But when she's in her bedroom and some scenes like at night, she looks like a straight up 14-year-old. Like she looks way younger. And I've just seen her
she
recently.
doesn't look that young to me, because she definitely looks more like 18, 19 to me. So
she looks younger in Beetlejuice for sure, which makes me question how like the whole Michael Keaton and her romance thing was supposed to work, because he's like totally an adult, because Michael Keaton's like 64 right now, and so he's older than she is, and
obviously.
Well, yeah, obviously. But she aged really well too. Like she, like in Stranger Things, she still looks not young, but she looks.
I would say interestingly in Stranger Things, they made her look really worn down in season 1, but in season 2 they let her get kind of pretty again.
They're doing that in this movie too. I think that they wanted her to have the makeup on at school, like the harder makeup, because it made her look a little older. And that's what a lot of women in school went for, was that, they did their makeup really well if they could do makeup. And then whenever she's at home by herself, she's not like that. And I think they were trying to kind of make her look a little more innocent, especially when she's not with JD, because there's a lot of like self-reflection at that point and journal writing and stuff like that. And her parents are kind of, they're very concerned about her. Like they're concerned about her well-being after the quote unquote suicide started.
So parents and adults in this movie in general, we've talked a lot about JD's dad, obviously.
Yeah.
What do you think about like the parents' priorities in this movie? Like, to me, they're all supremely fucked up. Like, Veronica's parents are completely clueless most of the time. They don't pay attention to her until JD tells them that she's about to commit suicide. Yeah. And even then, they don't stop her from running off to her room. And then you've got the principal and all the school board members
smoking all the time.
Well, yes, in the teacher's lounge. The teacher's lounge scenes remind me of like evil, like villain council meetings, the way that they're framed in the movie.
Well,
but you got the one guy going, it's too bad Heather wasn't a cheerleader. I would have gone half a day for a cheerleader.
I wanted to actually ask you about that school board meeting or school staff meeting in the room and that smoke, because I was like, you can't take smoke at all. Like, I was like, Laura couldn't work at this school. She would like die because.
Well, this was the 80s when that was not like expressly forbidden everywhere.
I would have a problem with that. So that always shocks me.
That just shows like. It's kind of like a leisure activity for them, and they're just smoking, talking about these dead teenagers and whether or not they should cancel school or make kids stay in school. So it's just, it just shows like they have really messed up priorities. Like they're not taking it very seriously. They're not that upset about it. They're just treating it as more of an inconvenience than anything.
When the first student dies, when Heather Chandler dies, I could see them being like, let's not really stop everything for this. Let's like use this as time to reflect. But then 2 more kids die, and they're kind of just like, they seem more annoyed by it than they seem to be worried or upset. And granted, the 2 kids that died after Heather Chandler were dickheads. And so I'm not saying they deserve to die, but I'm saying that like, if you're... Like
you'll notice like when the police officers find Kurt and Ram, they're upset because they're football players, but then they're like, oh, well, football season's over. So they're fine with it.
Like that feels like a very Texas thing to have happen. I think that like the movie kind of makes a point. It's like GTA. Like it makes a point of showing that nothing in this town is good. There's things that are worse than other things, and nobody's exactly a good person. Like maybe Betty comes off as being like good because you don't see very much of what Betty's doing. But
But Betty also has no personality.
Exactly. I'm willing to bet if you followed Betty for long enough. And I think that's why Betty and Barb and characters like that are so popular, is because there's such a mystery around them.
They're projections of what the audience wants them to be, because
exactly. They're Bella
aren't
Swan.
any defining details.
I don't know. I think that I didn't notice the parents being too terrible actively. They were just kind of all neglected.
They're extremely like ridiculously out of touch. Like they don't, in all the scenes that Veronica's like eating dinner with them, like they're not actually listening to what she's saying. They just have like their routine that they go through of like what to say. They don't actually pay attention to what she says to them.
I don't know. Like there's moments where her dad, especially, and her mom both. Okay, so like there's a really good exchange in the movie, later in the movie, where she's talking to them about teenagers when they're watching the suicide things on the news. And so she's like...
But even then in that scene, they're not taking away what she's trying to get them to understand. Her dad just goes off about, I don't patronize Bunny Rabbit. And that's not at all what she was going on about.
I wrote that whole exchange down. She was like, all we want is to be treated like human beings, not to be experimented on like guinea pigs or patronized like bunny rabbits. And then her dad's like, I don't patronize bunny rabbits. And I took that less as him not listening and more as him being a smart ass, because like that comment doesn't make any sense.
Oh, so I know throughout the whole movie, I take her parents as not paying attention to what she's actually saying to them. Like her mom responds, and that she is being treated like a human being. That's why she doesn't like it. But to me, that's not them addressing her concerns. Like, and her dad just doesn't even offer up a real response to anything.
Well, I think the mom's response is real, but I think it's not the response that's like nice or the way you would want to handle that. It's more like a sort of like, you're being treated like human beings, and it's because of that you're not being treated like children anymore, and you don't like it. It's that sort of thing. And
right, but to me, like, it's at that point, to me, it's too little too late for them to be interacting with Veronica, because throughout the rest of the movie, they aren't there for her. Like, whenever, like, they're around, but they're not present. And so at that point, it's kind of a weird moment for her mom to actually kind of be a mom. And even then, she kind of forgets about it a couple minutes later when Veronica goes off to her room.
I think that in a lot of ways, the 70s and 80s are that transitional period where we were kind of finding our feet with violence and comedy and just darker things. You can even see it in like, especially longer running series. There's a darkness in the 80s James Bond movies that just was not there previously. Like there's, he's choking women and shit. And
well, there's a lot to that though. With each new Bond actor brings a new era of Bond and a new kind of aesthetic and way of telling the story. And with like Roger Moore in the 70s, it was a lot about camp. I mean, that's when you had like Moonraker and stuff. So, and that's a lot of like James Bond is a lot of camp. So it is good to embrace that. But Timothy Dalton, they tried to go a darker route, didn't really take. So that's why when you get back to like Pierce Brosnan, it's a lot campier. And then they were finally able to kind of do that full grit once they got Daniel Craig.
But I feel like this movie like is so dark. Like it's like darkest timeline Mean Girls. And it's refreshing, even though it's an older movie, it's refreshing to see that this sort of thing happened at one point. And I feel like we see things today that happen, and we make movies that are dark. And like people will say that like, oh, this movie is really dark or it's really edgy. But like, it's weird that to me, the edgier movies were coming out in the late 80s. Like there's things that happen in 80s movies throughout the whole 80s that wouldn't fly in a movie today made about the same subject matter. The first thing that comes to mind is that blowjob scene in Ghostbusters, which I always forget it's there. And when I watch it again, I'm like, oh yeah, that's in this movie.
Well, I mean, this movie has a blowjob scene, and like...
Where?
Heather Chandler gives a blowjob to a guy at the Remington party.
I must have missed it. I don't know how I didn't see that.
They don't like show it, but like she leans over into his lap, and then afterwards they show her gargling water.
Oh, I did not catch that.
Right. So speaking of, I have some notes that I feel like we should discuss. Do you remember the scene at Heather Chandler's funeral where everyone is having an inner monologue over her casket?
Oh man, it's funny. I didn't write any notes about that, but that's some pretty cool stuff. Like Heather Duke praying that she's glad that Heather Chandler's dead. Yeah, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, Heather Duke's like little inner monologue about how she's prayed for this so many times, but she always felt really bad about it. But yet she knew God was really listening to her because he let it happen anyway.
He just took her out.
And
yeah.
And then Veronica wondering if what her thoughts are sounding bitchy.
There's a scene later on at the third funeral where Heather Chandler comes back as like a dream sequence thing, and she's speaking to.
Well, no, that whole funeral is a dream sequence.
Yeah. Like it took me a second to figure that out because it's a funeral for Heather Duke, but it doesn't ever happen.
Right.
But after that scene happens where it looks like she could have died, they don't show her again until almost the end of the movie. So in your head, it looks like she could have really died.
Right. But I mean, this movie does play with the dream sequence a lot. Like it opens with a dream sequence.
Yeah.
So.
And I think that's kind of a neat thing to do because it throws you off balance because, like I said, when he pulls the gun out, JD, and shoots at the football players, in my head, I was like, this is just one of those cutaway gags where they're going to cut away and come back and he'll be looking at them thinking about doing this. But it wasn't that. He just had blanks in the gun. And so
that's the first of many clues that JD is not okay.
Yeah.
Just like when he shows up in Veronica's bedroom. Like
what is with boys in the 80s and 90s and ladders in girls' bedrooms? Like boys were just coming into your bedroom.
The fact that she is not bothered by that really upsets me. Like he just shows up in your bedroom uninvited. And you never told him where you lived. Like, so he had to, like, follow you home.
I mean, that wasn't okay. And, like, did they show how he got there? Like, he obviously must have come to the window. Like, I don't think he went to her parents.
Yeah, they show him come through the window. Like, they show that. But, like...
Oh, okay.
It's still, to me, it's extremely problematic. Like, Veronica, use your brain here. It's been established that you have one.
That's one of those things that when you're a teenager, you have to fight with your brain versus your hormones versus your... wanting to be cool. There's a certain thing where you're like, well, if I react badly to this, he could go to school and tell everybody how much of a bitch I am or how stupid I am or how, I can't take a joke or whatever. And so like you try to balance all those things. And I think that's kind of what explains her sort of complacency with it. But I don't know if that can be explained after the fact where he pretended to shoot two students, because in my head, that wasn't pressed hard enough. Like that should have been punished harder.
Right. And she was there. She saw him pull the gun on them. And it's like, that's all kind of technically in the same day. So how is that not like a huge waving red neon flag?
I think that a lot of it is in the context of a Black comedy. These sort of movies,
and it's he's new. He's not one of the guys like she's grown up with. Clearly, it's kind of the fresh blood.
But I think that the Black comedy sort of genre is a weird one because it's really hard to find ones that are actually like on point. Like this is the rare example of Black comedy that worked. Because a lot of times, like a Black comedy turns out to be just like a sort of dry comedy with like weird gore in it.
No, I think that just depends on the type of Black comedy that it is. Like, you've got some that are about like violent things, but then you've also got ones that are more about like more realistic things. Like, and I would say like Heather's gets pretty violent at times, but it is about some very real issues.
Well, Heather's is violent, but it uses its violence in kind of a realistic issue way. The movie is definitely funny without the violence. And
right.
I think it draws a line between the seriousness of the violent acts themselves versus the aftermath of them and the lead up being funny. Like you said, when the cops find that dead Ram and Kurt in the woods, they're worried about the football team. Like that was the joke, like the punchline of a joke that really wasn't the death necessarily.
To an extent. But I mean, before that though, you have the very like Scooby-Doo chase through the woods.
The
like,
chase,
where they're going back and forth.
It could be read as funny, but it could be read as kind of...
To me, I read it as both, because it's cut like a Scooby-Doo chase where they're running through like the same parts of the woods back and forth.
Scooby-Doo.
But it's obviously very clearly a menacing thing because JD's chasing this guy who's completely defenseless with a gun.
Yeah, that was when she should have been like, okay, I got to call the cops or get out of here.
Right. And instead she just goes to her car and makes out with him as a cover. Like,
That's right. Yeah, the cops come after them, which, that was the other thing, was that they come after them and they just kind of like, let's make out and this will be our cover. And she's just okay with it after that. Like, when the first death happened, it was an accident. She could blame herself for that. But the second one, he totally lied to her. And she kind of does bring it up. She goes, well, you told me this story. And he just kind of like, blows her off. Like, her concerns aren't really his worry at that point.
She understands that he's dangerous, but at that point she's choosing not to care. It's a willful ignorance. Like, she doesn't want to believe that he's a terrible person.
For all of his "these other guys are bad guys" talk, his actions towards her, even his claim that he loves her, but then he comes over to kill her at one point, were like,
right.
You don't see how you're worse than these people in some ways, or that you're just straight up crazy. Yeah,
no, JD is a huge problem.
Yeah, he's definitely not a nice guy. And I appreciate the detail in the movie too, because there's some signs in the hallways and stuff near the end of the movie after all these quote unquote suicides happen. Like, one of them says the new happiness, and you can tell it's like, oh, some student group made this sign to kind of be like,
or the hippie teacher.
Yeah, the hippie teacher who was like, what did she want to do? Like some kind of like
she wanted to do, like, this is another thing that Mean Girls kind of took from Heather's, was the big feel good group therapy session.
That's right. Oh my god. Like, to me, that's the best part of Mean Girls. It's near to the end. A lot of the adult reactions to stuff was great, and that's one thing this movie is missing. The adults seem more incompetent and outside of everything.
But I think that's purposeful. Like, it's the kids. They don't feel like they're being paid attention to. Like, they feel like the adults are kind of against them to some degree, and so that's kind of what it's about.
That's kind of what JD's like little plan ends up being, is he's going to blow the whole school up and then pretend like it was this giant suicide from all the kids at the school, or to teach society a lesson. Like, I guess he figures that this will be like a turning point. And like, at one point when he first started, it was this idea he was going to get students to sign for this band that they made up for the movie who sings about suicide to come to the school. And I thought that was...
But I mean, that's itself in it is a joke in the movie. The big fun teenage suicide, don't do it. Like, is that problems can be solved by a feel-good song, or that suicide being a trend is a big thing in the movie as well.
Yeah, I feel like that people think that things that, like, people talk about suicide in a way, even today, that it's not taken seriously, quote unquote. And so I think that that's what they were kind of playing with, is that like all the cool kids are dying at the school and they're committing suicide.
There's the line that Veronica, when she's talking to Heather McNamara after Heather almost kills herself in the bathroom, she goes, "If everyone jumped off a bridge, would you do it too?" And Heather just kind of thinks for a second and she goes, "Yeah, I probably would."
Oh no, I thought you were talking about a different line. There's a line where they're talking about how, I think that's Veronica at home, is talking about how after Heather Chandler committed suicide, she became deep. And after Kurt and Brown committed suicide, they became like interesting and sensitive, and it was this different...
that's Veronica writing in her journal. And she talks about how suicide has kind of transformed these people that really weren't more than what they were portrayed as in this movie, as better people.
And I think that can be said about death too. Like, when a person dies, a celebrity or something, people rush to kind of make them into a better person than they were.
There's that aspect of it, and then there's also people rushing for the attention of it, that they want to be like, yes, I was their friend, I knew them, like they touched my life in some way. Yeah. And you see that with like Heather Duke going on like 3 different TV stations to talk about like sharing clothes with Heather Chandler and stuff like that.
And yeah, people in this town just didn't care. Like, there's an attention grab.
There's an interesting juxtaposition with it too, because you've got Martha, who tries to commit suicide but doesn't, and no one cares.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
No one is like, "Oh my gosh, how are you? Like, I'm so sorry we weren't there for you. It's, you failed. You weren't even cool enough to do it right. And we're just going to continue treating you like we always have."
I think that Martha didn't try to commit suicide. like I know that this is like reading into it hard. I think Martha thought that if she tried to commit suicide and failed, that it was like a high risk, high reward game. Like, what if she dies or lives? People are going to pay her attention.
Right. I think there's that, like, I think she did want to commit suicide, but she also did pick a method that wasn't necessarily for
Super
sure going
deadly,
to kill her.
yeah.
So she was hoping to either end it or get the attention, and it didn't work out either way.
Yeah, and it was high risk, high reward, and the kind of both things happened. Like, she didn't die, but she didn't get the fame out of it. People who had died previous to her were sort of school celebrities. Like, they were people that by them going down, you could kind of get on the edge of that and be sort of like, look at me, like I knew this person, I did this. But with her, there's no social currency that knowing Martha was going to give you. Now, if she had really died, they probably would have tried to pretend that they were, quote unquote, not the people who were bad to her. They'd be like, well, I wasn't the one who did this. I wasn't the one who did that. Trying to sort of push other people into like, well, this person was way worse to her than I was. And I think they would have done that if she had actually, succeeded. But since he didn't, there was no reason to pay her attention.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really interesting juxtaposition just when you have, the popular kids who do commit suicide and how everyone just jumps to be part of the mourning for it and the attention, and then poor Martha.
People in the town were just so careless that they didn't really care that that Heather had died or that Kurt and Ram had died. They just cared about the attention because it passes so quickly. Like, the school is back on its feet so fast, and it's not football season,
Well, okay, so something else that I always find interesting about this movie is that it's one of the few movies that I can think of that it's not about eating disorders, but that portrays a character as having an eating disorder.
And makes fun of it.
Very actively.
They make fun of it, like...
Well, they make fun of it, but they also address it as a problem. Like, when Heather Duke is, forcing Veronica to help her puke, Heather Chandler and Heather McNamara are... they are making fun of her for it, but they're also saying that she shouldn't be doing it. But they're not stopping her either, so...
I can't think of a movie that portrays eating disorders either.
To me, and especially just in this movie in particular, it's an aspect of how toxic being one of the popular girls is. Like, you're doing insane things just to keep your status.
Well, yeah, it's like, it's not just that, it's that no one is safe. Like, you'd think, oh, when I get to be popular, I'll be safe. Like, I won't be subject to these rules. But there's a whole new set of rules you have to follow to remain popular. And people are always looking to, like, unseat you from your position and stuff.
Right. And to me, especially with Heather Duke and her being the green one with all the envy for Heather Chandler, like, I think it's very apparent that's who she's emulating. Like, throughout the movie, she goes through this transformation where she gradually looks more and more like Heather Chandler, aside from having brown hair. Like, but she even starts curling her hair, and obviously she gets her scrunchie, and like she starts wearing red.
The scrunchie was the dead giveaway.
Right, but I mean, the scrunchie is an interesting thing because that's like the totem. Like, when Veronica snatches away at the end,
yeah, it's like a crown.
She's robbing Heather Duke of her power.
And the scrunchie was red too, so it was like the power color scrunchie that one of them had to have.
It's because once Heather Duke once she has the scrunchie, she starts wearing red. Like, she takes over Heather Chandler's spot completely.
That's kind of funny. Like, I didn't notice the colors. I noticed the scrunchie because it was red. And I was like, it's red. But I didn't notice the colors in terms of character because I notice that sort of thing sometimes and I don't notice it other times. Like, it's really apparent in some movies that colors are playing a huge role.
I think it's super obvious in this one. Like, just because all their outfits are the same colors.
I think that it threw me off in this because the colors aren't so... Like, especially on Veronica, her colors aren't so overtaking her outfit. Like, the coat she wears is black, and those leggings, I did notice the leggings because they were just so blue. Like, I'm used to seeing black leggings.
But I mean, that's Veronica kind of rebelling against being a Heather. is she's wearing her color, but she's also
wearing
wearing
like
more
black.
neutral,
Yeah.
darker colors. To which like JD, he only like wears black, and so to me like colors play a huge role in like showing the personalities of the people. Like especially like Heather McNamara, she's yellow. Yellow's just kind of bland and passive.
She's the Hufflepuff.
Pretty much.
I think that JD doesn't wear just black. Like he has colors on, but they're very like.
But he's
muted.
always wearing more black than anything else.
It's not just that. It's just like he has a green shirt on at one point, but the green he's wearing is like it's so dulled down with black that it might as well be black or gray. And
right, everything he's wearing is dark.
And I think that like they do a lot of. He's got this very like sort of unassuming look to him, like the dark clothes, the oversized clothing. It seems like an effort to look like he doesn't care, while, you know, obviously caring enough to make an effort to look like he doesn't, you know. And so
well, and then you've got like Betty Finn, who wears like beige. Like that's literally how little personality she has, is that she wears beige.
I don't want to be like Chris Croker, but I think once you just leave Betty alone. Like Betty's okay. Like just you're picking on that poor girl too much.
Well, no, I'm making a point. Like she's wearing beige. Martha wears beige too. Like, and she wears some white to, I think, show that she's kind of like the one good character. But like,
doesn't Martha
they wear very
on,
nondescript colors.
Doesn't Martha have on sort of like a patterned shirt at one point? Almost like what a toddler would wear.
She wears a Big Fun shirt, like the song that's in the movie.
That's right, Big Fun. Martha was one of those characters who almost felt like she was like a plot device too, but she, like you said, she's the foil for the Heathers. But Martha really only shows up in the beginning, the middle, and the end of the movie. She's not throughout very much. Like I don't remember seeing her at the funeral scenes at all. Maybe she's there, but I just didn't notice. She definitely doesn't get those inner monologue moments like everybody else.
Well, I mean, you could argue that her suicide note is to an extent.
Yeah, the suicide note, I guess, is an inner monologue, but it comes apart from everybody else's, because most people get inner monologues at a certain point together, except for Veronica, who gets them when she writes in her journal.
I mean, Veronica's the main character. You're gonna have more voiceover from her than anyone else.
Well, obviously, I'm just saying that like Martha is always set apart from other characters. She sits alone. Right. She's, you know, alone.
That's exactly it. Like she doesn't fit in.
I mean,
like it's very obvious.
In my cast list, I don't have Martha on there. I did the Heathers and Veronica and Christian Slater and Betty and Ram and Kurt, and because they were like the ones that I was most fixated on as people throughout the movie.
I did forget to mention another thing about Betty and Veronica.
What's that?
Their last names are Finn and Sawyer, after Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn.
I didn't see that because I didn't know Veronica's last name. Like in my head, I just didn't write it down. Like I wrote everybody else's last name, but not hers. And JD's name is Jason Dean, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I think they were trying to make like a James Dean joke at first. I thought was what they were going for, like a rebel sort of thing. I was like, oh, it's Jason Dean. Maybe it's like half of a joke. I don't know.
I mean, you also have to think like 80s was John Hughes land, like for teen movies, like, and this is kind of the antithesis of that. Like this is like the anti-Breakfast Club.
Yeah, and I think that's a little intentional too, because the John Hughes movies, they're not squeaky clean, but they are a very polished sort of message to teenagers, except for that shit that happened in Pretty in Pink. That was a disaster. But most of the other movies are pretty like on message for teenagers. And it's like that GTA take on the world where everything is just terrible. Like it's a satire of everything being bad. And, you know, there are no good guys, basically. It's Game of Thrones.
Right. I mean, your main character, she's kind of a terrible person.
I think there was a point where you could have legitimately terrible people lead a movie and it was seen as okay.
But I mean, you also don't see that with women, especially on screen, especially like in the 80s. Like female characters kind of had to be likable for the most part, especially if they're going to lead the movie. Even
now, you can have a bad woman lead a movie. But there was a point where, like in the 90s, sort of, people had to be better. I don't know what it was. It was just like this kind of, people had to be a better aesthetic about it. I kind of like a bad person leading something. My only problem is that she seems to think she's good, though. I would like it better
Which,
if she knew she was bad and just
I think
went with
it's
it.
interesting that she thinks she's good, but she is being terrible. That to me, that's a very interesting thing, because I think a lot of people think that they're good people, and not that everyone is terrible, but some people really are not. But they continue to do things like they're the moral authority, or that they're making things better for other people when they're making things worse.
It's realistic, though, that a person who is like her would think she's a good person, because she rationalizes a lot of things the same way JD rationalizes that the other students are bad.
Right. I mean,
he's the good one.
Veronica she's hanging out with the Heathers every day. Like, obviously some of that's going to rub off on her, but it's also showing her, like, okay, I'm not like that, so I'm not terrible. I'm actually a good person.
If every, other time they do a bad thing, she stays out of it. She's like, well, I didn't do that this time. Like, I convince myself I'm good because I don't always act on the bad impulses or the bad things that my crowd's doing. And I know it's wrong. So I'm kind of good. And I think that JD kind of pushes her over that edge, because he rationalizes doing bad things for the greater good, but then doesn't actually do the greater good part. He just kind of has this agenda.
He kind of convinces her that she's doing something to make things better for everybody, when if she kind of really thought about it, like, it's not. Like, there's no scenario where doing a violent prank to someone is going to fix something.
I mean, if it was just a violent prank, it would be one thing. Like, if he had just shot pellets at those two boys in the woods, or knocked them out and laid them down like that and made everybody think that they were together, it would have been one thing. It'd be a different movie. It'd still be cruel, and it would be like, kind of homophobic for the town to react the way that they probably would react, but it wouldn't be the same as him killing them.
Well, JD doesn't really see anyone else as a person. They're all kind of tools for him to use. Like, even Veronica, when she's not his girlfriend, he plans to use her. He wants to kill her and make her suicide part of his mission. Like,
and he even says that, I did love you, and it's like, no, you really didn't. Like, it doesn't seem at all like you understand emotions in general.
I mean, I think that he thought that he loved her, but I think he doesn't really know what that means. I think he was fixated on her because she participated in some of his stuff, and they did get along on a certain wavelength. And I think he was like, oh, this must be what it's like to be in love.
Yeah, I don't think he understands what emotions are, honestly.
Well, yeah, exactly. Like, he's got problems.
I mean, name an honest emotion that you felt like JD showed. Like, does he ever seem angry to you? When?
He does. Not for legitimate reasons, but like when he feels that when he's not getting his way, that's when he's angry. It's a very petulant, like, kind of bratty anger, but it's him being angry.
I feel like anger for him shows in the way that, like, sociopaths kind of show
entitlement.
Anger. Yeah, it's like it's like a narcissist or sociopath sort of anger where they kind of act out because people aren't falling in line with them. But, like, even when at the end of the movie she tries to come after him, he's not angry when she pulls a gun on him. He's not angry when she shoots him. Like, his reaction to being shot by her is just that, oh, you got the best of me.
He's actually kind of proud.
It feels like almost like some sort of Sith Lord relationship where he's like, oh, you bested me, now you're the master. And he just goes and, like, blows himself up, which is the craziest thing. I'm glad the movie had the balls to actually go through with him blowing himself up, because in my head, I thought she was going to talk him out of it, or that there would be some sort of, like... No,
she talked him into it. This is actually the neutered ending of the movie. They had a different ending originally planned that they thought was too dark. It was Veronica killing herself.
Really?
With her, with her putting on the vest and exploding.
I actually thought at one point she was going to walk over there and, like, hug him, and they were going to blow up together. But I'm kind of glad that they didn't back out of the him blowing himself up somehow, and that I feel like him blowing himself up was, like you said, she talked him into it. I feel like that was because she realized he's not really made to function. Like, something broke inside of JD at some point, whether he was born this way or his mother's death or just over time being chipped away at, something broke inside that person, and they weren't going to function correctly in society. It's kind of like what's his face from Watchmen, Rorschach. Like Rorschach is not going to function in society. Like that character can't stick around because they're too broken to work. And they work like in certain characters, like JD might have worked in certain environments for a while. Like, you know, maybe if you let JD loose in a country that's at war, he can do that. But you can't let JD loose in an office building or a neighborhood because he starts to just do things to people.
Right. The scene where JD and Veronica kill Kurt and Ram. What did you think about them leaving those weird mementos at the scene?
My favorite part about that whole thing is that they talk about like this, I think it was sparkling water, and they're like,
the mineral water.
It was mineral water. And, you know, they're like, you know, when they see this, they're going to know they're gay. And it's like, oh, that's a weird thing.
Veronica's like, are you sure?
And the cops take it out and they
yeah.
go, oh, they're like, look at this. And it's like, oh man, like we know exactly what's going on. And I kind of love those sort of jokes where the joke is very like, it counts on everybody being very much like in the same position. And that joke's very 80s because even bottled water back then was seen as weird. Like I remember in my lifetime a point when bottled water was a thing you just didn't buy.
I like how it's like the stuff is just left in a bag next to their bodies, and like it's supposed to be proof that they're gay.
It's like a picnic, isn't it?
No, he just puts it in like a plastic gift bag and just leaves it next to the bodies.
That's really funny. Like in my head, I thought it was like a picnic bag or something they were taking.
No, he didn't like. They didn't like lay it out or anything. It's just like they just left it in the bag, just a whole bunch of
That's
random
really
stuff.
That's really good.
And
like,
then it's also funny to me. Like I have to wonder, where did JD get the porn mag?
I mean, I'm trying to think. Back
he
then,
talks about how they're in conservative Ohio, like, and that people who would have it would be gay. Like, so where does he know where to find it? Or like get it without having someone like raise questions about him or something.
I don't doubt that he would steal it though.
Right. It's like, I don't think that he had it like laying around.
He's like, I just keep gay porn to play it on people sometimes.
That was like a weird thing. Like, I mean, I could see like he could have like shoplifted it or something, like if he knew where to find it. But I'm like, you're making a point about how you live in such a conservative, like oppressive place. I can't imagine that they would have that.
It's such a weird thing that you found. Like, I didn't even connect that because in my head, the bottle of water was way more weird. Like that they were like, it was like a glass bottle of water, was it? It's like a glass mineral bottle.
I don't remember.
But that whole scene to me was cool. And the funeral that followed it was funny too, because the dad's like, I love my dead gay son. And like, like going on, and it's a double funeral. Like, what the fuck is that? Like, you don't do that for two people that aren't related. Like, that's just weird.
Well, no, it's because everyone was acknowledging that they were lovers.
Oh, I guess that's right. I just thought to myself, like, are you trying to save money or some shit? Like, this is weird. Like, I don't want my funeral with somebody else's.
It was they wanted to be together, so they had the funeral was together.
It's like a Romeo and Juliet thing.
Kind of. Okay, I have a note that I appreciate that, like, the movie doesn't shame Veronica for having sex with JD right away. I mean, you could say in the grand scheme of things it does, but I don't read it that way.
But back then, were they shaming people for having sex in movies? Like, I don't know.
I mean, think about a lot of teen movies, like the way that they portray sex, like especially for women. Like, it's always the girl is like, no, not yet. Let's wait till it's special.
That just depends on the movie type, though. I feel like some movies people hook up and it's fine, but I also feel like that there was like, you know, horror movies used to kill people for having sex. Like if you had sex in a horror movie, you're gonna die.
But I mean, it still happens. But
yeah, but I think it just depends on the type of movie. But it definitely is. You know,
and usually in a lot of movies, if a woman has like sex with someone, like especially if it's before they're in a committed relationship, she's punished for it in some way.
You said that you don't see it that way, but I think that kind of the point, like, is there's like a bit of JD like seducing her kind of like into doing these things, because a lot of it
I read it as she seduced him because he talks about how he never played strip croquet before.
Well, no one should ever do that.
To me, it seems it's very much her choice, because she makes a concerted, you know, effort at that party to not sleep with that one guy, and then she very specifically chooses to sleep with JD right after that.
A better sort of measurement of how, like, quote unquote progressive the movie is is not that she just doesn't have any consequence for it, but that when it happens, it's not the main focus of the movie. No one really
Right.
talks about it. She doesn't really go to her friends and tell them, and they're not like, "Oh, you did that." Like, it's a very sort of like normal thing,
Yeah,
and
it's not a big deal, but and it's also, I mean, it's not a big deal because it doesn't have any negative consequences for her right away. Like,
yeah,
she ends up in a relationship with him, and things are, for the most part, going smoothly until people die.
it's not just that. Like you said, she ends up in a relationship with him, which is what usually people will use as like a sort of like warning, is that, well, if a boy sleeps with you, he won't want to date you afterwards. Like, no, why would that be the case? Like, that's not how that works, all the time. And so, like, it's not that the movie is afraid to show sex in a bad light, because they have, what's obviously like date rape, and they have other things happening in the movie that are definitely like cautionary about this, or showing bad things that can happen, which, rape is not sex, but they're showing a bad thing that can happen to a person in this situation. And also no one rescues them from it. It just happens. And so, like,
Right.
they're not afraid to show it, but they definitely make a conscious effort. Maybe it's just that they're trying to give their female character agency. Like, I don't know if it was an intentional thing, but a lot of times in the 80s and 90s, and even now, you have female leads that don't have any real kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Like, they don't have any real drive. Like, they're not driving the plot, and
They don't
they just
usually
react
have a
to things.
purpose other than being a part of the story as the girlfriend or the wife, or as just kind of a sidekick.
Well, even if they're the lead of the movie, it's more that, like, their purpose kind of comes from the male character, and they don't make any
Right.
active decisions. Like, even though she's following JD into these situations, she makes active decisions too, and then she makes the final active decision to push him away. Because this movie could have been another movie. It could have been a reform movie where she, like, teaches him how to be good or something, and it wasn't that. And that's kind of a better tale to tell people, because I kind of get tired of this whole idea that if you find a bad guy, all you have to do is love him and he'll just become right again. Yeah. It's like, no, if your boyfriend's murdering people for fun because he thinks he's the moral authority, maybe leave that motherfucker alone, or let him blow himself up, or talk him into it.
Even in like John Hughes movies, like, sex is kind of it's a big thing that's kind of looming that everyone is thinking about. And sometimes it's kind of shown, but it's usually just like it's kind of an entity that everyone is thinking or talking about. And there's a lot of consequences around it.
They treat it like it's like some kind of like Lovecraftian horror monster where no one can really see it, and they can't describe what it is, but it's like it's there and it's affecting the world. And
well, in a lot of teen movies, it's what drives the whole teen movie.
Yeah, it is literally the MacGuffin in the movie. Is someone's trying to get sex, and they got to go through all these things to get it.
Even ultimately, like, JD and Veronica don't end up together. I mean, he's dead. Like, so it's not one where it's not like a standard movie where people get together by the end and stay together.
In a way, you said that they were going to have her kill herself too, or was he going to not die?
Well, she was going to kill herself, and she would see everybody in heaven at a prom. It's based off of the one thing that he says, where the only place people get along is in heaven. Yeah, they were going to do like a heaven prom.
I think that actually is a kind of neat ending for that, but I also don't like that she had to die to do it.
I think it would have been way too high concept, and to me, I think it kind of would have ruined some of the movie for me.
I feel like that it'd be a neat ending in another movie, but I feel like you're right. It would ruin what was going on, because the movie really tries its hardest to paint this picture of her versus him later in the movie. There was a real fear I had that she was going to die, not because he killed her and like bested her, but because she chose to kill herself with him. And I thought that would just ruin the whole thing for me, like, because I felt like she learned that she wasn't like him and kind of stood up against him. And for her to go back on that and be like, well, I have to go with him now because we're meant to be together, was just, it would have kind of sold the whole movie for me.
Mm-hmm.
So you wanted to speak about the actual musical, you said?
Yes, that was my next set of notes. So I actually hadn't seen the musical up until this weekend. I decided to watch it.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I had been kind of nervous about watching it just because I didn't know if it would be good, and I didn't want it to kind of tarnish my love of the movie. Because it was an off-Broadway debut. It is on YouTube. There's an official version, and there's like a smaller theater company's version as well. I highly recommend the legit version, which isn't really legit because it's someone filming it in the theater with their phone. But I recommend like the real theater company's version over like the smaller companies, just because the voice talent is so much better. Like it's I mean, that's what happens like when you have like Broadway actors versus local regional actors. It was technically off Broadway, so it doesn't have like the huge production value. But it does have better costumes as well. Since it doesn't have like much of a stage setup, it's just they've got some pretty good costumes. And it portrays Veronica in a much better light. In the musical, she starts off as unpopular, and she does a favor for the Heathers, which gets her into their good graces and then rises her up. But they do change some other stuff about Veronica. Like they get rid of Betty Finn altogether. Her former best friend is actually Martha. And they make Veronica poor, which is interesting to me because in the movie, she's definitely rich.
I could see how that would go either way. I think that having her be rich makes it more believable that she fits in with them as a person. Because I feel like if she had just been like poor in the movie, it would be like she's kind of like their pet. Like they're just taking an interest in this other person because she's amusing to them.
Right, but like that's why I said it's interesting in the musical that they do make that choice, because again, it's another thing that makes her kind of the underdog and more sympathetic, because there's some points where like people make fun of her for being white trash, which was a weird inclusion. I thought, like, I was like, you could just have her be poor, maybe don't call her white trash, but like she doesn't ever seem trashy at all, so it's really weird.
White trash is like the one racial slur you can just throw at somebody and they won't even defend themselves. They're just like appalled and taken aback. And so I think that that's why they use it a lot in things where people are poor. But in terms of the actors, like not having to have a Betty and a Martha saves them having an extra actor, which is not necessarily a money issue, but it's definitely a line.
That's a time issue, and that's a relationship. And
I think that could have helped the movie if they had just combined Betty and Martha, and that would have made the ending make more sense too. Because I didn't know why she didn't go be with Betty at the end. That made more sense to me.
Like I said, it's weird. Betty just kind of disappears.
I still think, like, I'm not just being obsessed with Betty. I just feel like if they had, there's like you said, there's kind of like a language to movies and a contract you make. And to me, the contract seemed off when they didn't fulfill it by saying, okay, you go back to Betty now because she was your friend originally. And
it would have been fine if they had just like included Betty in that exchange. Like, hey, Martha, hey, Betty.
Yeah.
Come watch movies.
And it seems like even more of like a tease that they even have her and Betty kind of link up mid-movie and hang out for a bit and then not bring her back as that other person. I don't know. It just, those kind of things irk me because of like writing, like just me and like,
there's no follow through on that, but it makes sense to me, like world building wise, that they're two different characters like that. But there is no follow through at the end of the movie for it.
I would have liked to see why Veronica was in the group to begin with. Like, I wish I could have seen like that exchange, like the play you said did it. Not necessarily. I don't think that the favor makes sense, but I think it's more like a status thing. Like, I could see them seeing her being like, she's also
the way that
wealthy.
It works in the musical is that the Heathers are in the bathroom, and so is Veronica, and they get caught by a teacher because the bell is wrong, and so Veronica forges a hall pass for all of them.
I like that a lot.
But so the way that works is she makes a deal with the Heathers, like, I'll forge some stuff for you if you let me sit at your table at lunch. You don't even have to talk to me, just let me sit there so people will leave me alone.
That's pretty neat.
So that she's get picked on and stuff, and that's the deal they make. But then they end up kind of like taking her in and turning her into one of them. And
I kind of like that a lot. Like I like that because one thing I liked was her forgery thing, because that skill is interesting and it's not really gendered either. It's very neutral. It just makes me think that it's like a very spy-like skill. It's not normal to see someone, like, people do it in movies like as a one-off gag. Like they go, oh, I can forge this signature and do it. But she was constantly talking about forging notes and signatures and stuff.
Yeah. And so another thing about the musical, I don't have a ton of notes about it. and I'll explain why. But it does borrow from the original movie screenplay a little bit, in that Veronica is planning to die at the end of the musical. Like, she goes back to school with the intention of killing herself, and then decides not to.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say that she goes back and it just ends without telling what happened.
Yeah, no, she has the intentions of planning to die, to stop JD and stuff. Like, planning, like, basically like, going to blow herself up with him, so that he doesn't kill anybody else.
And it's funny that, you know, we didn't really discuss the blowing up the school thing very much, but it's funny that I made that Fight Club reference earlier. And JD is very much Tyler Durden. He's just a real person. Like, he speaks a lot like Tyler, but he doesn't do anything to make right the injustices. The same way Tyler does things that he thinks are these grandiose plans that are going to make the justice right in the world. More so in the book than in the movie. The movie kind of drops a lot of that. But he's not really doing anything about the wrong he actually sees. And in fact, he kind of just takes the wrong that society does and encourages his own sort of brand of like toxic masculinity that like is like the through line of the movie is that he's doing other toxic things and it's just they're done his way, so they're okay. The blowing up the building thing.
I was just going to finish up about the musical. I didn't have a ton of notes on it because I wasn't very impressed by it. It started out okay, but I got really bored really fast. By the end of Act 1, I was kind of tuning out and doing other things. The music was just kind of bland to me. There were a couple good songs, but nothing that like truly stood out to me. So that was a little disappointing, but it wasn't terrible. Like, I think it did a decent kind of service to the movie. The source material. It just was kind of meh.
I could see this one being a musical, but it would have to have the right kind of song.
I think on this one, it very much depends too on the casting. Like I said, I saw a little bit of one from a small theater company, and while they did a good job with like their sets and stuff, like I did not care for their casting of some of the characters, which took me out of it a lot. And at least in like the bigger production, the off-Broadway one, it was. While I didn't care for the musical a lot, I did like the casting a lot. One of the things I did like about it was they keep Heather Chandler around as kind of a Tyler Durden, I guess, just someone that Veronica kind of talks to as the story goes on. And she just reacts to things, and it's pretty funny. But I did have some notes about the TV show that's coming next year.
Oh, is it a TV show? Okay, see, I heard remake and I thought... Well, actually, I didn't hear remake. Someone else told me that they're making a remake, and I thought it was going to be a movie.
There have been rumors about a sequel to Heather's since, like, the early 90s, and it's gone through various incarnations. And Winona Ryder has, like, openly said she would love to do a sequel. But what they've actually done is it's going to be a TV show on the Paramount Network, which is funny to me because that's going to be Spike TV soon. Like, that's what Spike TV is changing to. And so if you think about Heather's being on Spike, it's pretty funny. But there's not a lot of information out about it yet, but they have done a teaser trailer, and they've released character images for some of the main characters. And so they've made some significant changes because this is going to be an anthology series, apparently, where each season is going to focus on some kind of different take on the Heathers. So the first season, Heather Chandler is apparently a plus-size kind of queen bee with the crazy fashion taste. Like in the trailer, she's got like a fur coat and fishnets and stuff. Heather McNamara is black with some really cool winged liner and like a 60s like Beatles kind of haircut. Heather Duke is actually a genderqueer person. So I believe it's actually a guy, but they've all been referring to him as a genderqueer, so I could be wrong. And then Betty Finn is Asian, and Veronica is blonde and pretty bland looking.
That's just weird to me that they're going to do an anthology series. Like, that's where I was like, whoa, like, are they going to do like different realities sort of?
I mean,
like...
you'll be excited to know that Shannon Doherty is involved, so she's going to be in it in some capacity.
I will look for it to see what they're doing.
I'm a little hesitant for this just because there isn't a lot out yet about it. Like, there's a really short teaser trailer, but it gives like absolutely nothing away. And like, not in like a good way to me. Like, you want to show a little bit of what you're gonna have, but all it is mostly it's the Heathers like walking down the hall like a power walk, and then it's got Veronica saying "fuck me gently" with a chainsaw.
At least it's on Paramount TV, a channel that might have some kind of new brand that we don't know about.
I just want more information and then I would feel better about it. Okay, so at the very beginning of the movie, during I think it's the dream croquet sequence, Heather Chandler tells Heather McNamara that she had a brain tumor for breakfast, or to have a brain tumor for breakfast. So that line is pretty mythic because the actress that played Heather Chandler actually died of a brain tumor.
Really?
Yeah, I believe she died in 2001 of a brain tumor, which is scary prophetic, but there's another one like that in this movie, which it's one of the kids at the funeral where he's praying that he doesn't kill himself, and that actor actually killed himself about a year before that actress died. Isn't that so creepy?
Yeah, that's kind of creepy. Like that creeps me out a little bit. That's not fun.
Like there's two really like foreshadowing lines for these characters, for these same actors.
And especially so close together in terms of them dying so close together in real life.
Yeah, that part, like I was looking it up to verify the dates and stuff, and that was so weird that it was like within like about a year of each other. That was really weird. All right, and then so here's your Tyler Durden connection.
Oh man, I can't wait.
Brad Pitt actually auditioned for JD and was turned down. So, yeah.
You know, that might sound weird, but Brad Pitt at this point in history, we have to all remember that Brad Pitt did Cool World. And if you've ever seen Cool World, it's basically like shitty Roger Rabbit. It happens well after Roger Rabbit in terms of like placement, but it is so shitty looking. And it's the same sort of thing. It's like a guy goes into a cartoon world and Brad Pitt is terrible in it. And so I could see them seeing Brad Pitt and versus Christian Slater and going, we'll take this one, you know, even though Christian Slater is totally not Brad Pitt right now, like in any way, shape, or form.
At that time too, Brad Pitt was also working up to kind of being a hunk. His next movie ended up being Thelma and Louise, in which his character was also named JD.
It's funny, I always forget he's in that movie. Like there's always like these like crazy casting. This could have been a thing that happened, and sometimes I wish they happened. But I honestly don't think I would have liked to have seen Brad Pitt do this, because I don't like want actors that I really like being normal dudes being in crazy roles all the time either.
Yeah, it's just one of those funny casting stories. Like the role of Veronica was originally intended for Jennifer Connelly.
Oh man, I would have liked that. I just love Jennifer Connelly. Like,
see, I can't picture her in this at all. Like I just can't. I can't, maybe, I haven't seen her anything super weird other than Labyrinth, in which she's like a child, so she's not the one being weird. So I can't picture her as Veronica. Like I can't see her kind of doing the snark. I can't see her doing all of that the way that Winona Ryder does.
But it also could be that you've seen the movie so many times that like to picture other people in it just like bothers you. And like
that is true, but I really love Winona Ryder, so that might also be it.
I've seen her in other things here and there, but she's always been on point. Like she can carry her weight.
I think she's incredibly underrated. Like it's unfortunate that her career never got as big as it could have, and some of that might have been due to some personal issues.
I think that she has like one of those Robert Downey Jr. careers where she was doing really well at one point and then just vanished due to personal reasons and then kind of resurfaced. You know, not to the point that he has, like he's become a megastar, but you know, Stranger Things is big news and she does an amazing job in it. And people are always seem to be really shocked that she can do it. And I'm like, she's always been a decent actress. I've never seen her just
she's always done a really good job. She just hasn't been around a lot. Like she did her small cameos in the first Star Trek movie where she played Spock's mom. So it was a really small part, but it was recognizably Winona. And it was kind of her big return, I think, in a big movie. Do you want more trivia?
Sure.
All right, so this movie actually led to Shannon Doherty getting cast in 90210.
Really?
Tori Spelling apparently saw her in it and gave like her father's company people like the movie and like, you should hire this girl. All right, and so my final piece of trivia it's not really trivia, I guess, so much, but when this movie came out, it had a very similar kind of controversy around it, like 13 Reasons Why did. People thought that it glamorized suicide.
I don't know. I definitely see if this show comes to TV, there being some controversy if they stick to what the movie was, if they stick to the whole suicide thing, if they stick to the whole killing the bullies thing, because that stuff just does not go over well with people today.
Well, it'll just be interesting to see how it just actually plays out.
All right, so I think that we've done about all we can do on Heathers today, and thanks for joining us for our first episode. Laura, go ahead and tell us what our next movie is going to be for our next episode.
All right, so our next episode is going to be pretty exciting because we're going to be watching the Christian Bale classic Newsies.
Okay, see, I didn't even know what we were watching, so this is a surprise to me. I've never heard of this movie, so this is going to be interesting. Join us here every other week for a new episode with a new movie and a new discussion. You can find the podcast online at Last Chance Theater on Twitter on Twitter we're what? At
Last Chance THTR.
Okay, and lastchancetheater.com is the website. And we're on Facebook, and
we've got all the social media handles.
Well, just follow them for details. And where can they find you at, Laura?
You can find me on all the social media at LauraXJ.
It's pretty easy to find her. And I'm on Twitter at CTK86 and on Instagram at Lens of Justin. Now, very different things, but I don't know why I did that. That's bad for branding.
That is bad for branding. Gotta fix that.
Yeah, I know. So join us next time, not next week, but a week after that. From Last Chance Theater, I've been Justin.
I'm Laura.
Thank you for joining us. Bye.
Bye.